All right. Len, I think that we have a quiet, wrapped room. It's time to begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neon Museum of Philadelphia.
Yeah, I'd like to do that exact thing and welcome you to the Neon Museum of Philadelphia. The Neon Museum was formed in 1983 and we haven't had a proper opening yet. So we're over 40 years past due, and this isn't really a proper opening either because it's a virtual opening, but it's the best that we could do, and we now have a new home. What I wanted to do tonight is introduce you to the other staff at the Neon Museum, and then we will have a bit of a countdown, New Year's kind of a countdown. In any case, let's first tell you who our talented staff are. Behind the camera is Alyssa Shea. So Alyssa, why don't you run in front? And she's our video wizard. And then our master of neon, who's installed most of the signs in the museum, Sam Contorado.
There he is.
You hear the cheers for Sam.
Woo!
And you've already met Jeremy, who's hosting. Jeremy did our website. And in some of the that you've received, it says that we have a bunch of these professionals.
I want to see people.
No, I want to see
weirdos. I think we're a little low on the museum professionals, but a lot of us are talented weirdos, and there's no one who's more of a talented weirdo than Mason Carter, who.
Hello, everyone.
And my wife Judy is here too. And we don't even have to be so
My
sweet.
friends, family, mahjong players, and others.
So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be doing tonight. The plan is that we'll be turning on the lights and talking about the neon signs and about the other things that happen here at the Neon Museum. And our idea is that we'll spend maybe 30 or 40 minutes doing that. And then hopefully you'll have lots of questions because we want to follow up our presentation part with what we would call an Ask Me Anything. So you could ask me or any of the other folks anything that you want, and we'll do our best to respond to you and to answer. But before we get into turning on the lights, I think that we should have a New Year's toast because we're only about 15 days past New Year's. And so if you all have something to drink at home, why don't you pull out your bubbly or your beer or whatever, and we're going to do the same over here. I'll put on my mask, and Sam, who used to be a bartender, don't worry about the lights yet, Sam. Your job is to be a bartender and to pop the cork on the champagne. And it's worth waiting for this because we're going to see the neon signs once we all have our toast. Okay, so let's get our bubbly.
Yay.
And then we're going to count down. Just a little bit. Thank you.
Ooh, thank you.
The camera lady's already been drinking, so we don't. I don't know if she needs.
Way to blow up my spot.
All right, so we're going to count down. You could all count down with us at home from 10 down to 0. And just like at a real New Year's Eve on Times Square, where the ball would drop, when we get down to 0, the neon lights will go on, and we'll survey the lights. So let me hear you say 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5,
5, 4, 3, 2. Happy New Year! Happy New Year!
Wow.
And you can turn the
Vernon Hart already has. There's hair pair, the before and after the toupee. Look at that.
a minute to kind of zoom around.
Congratulations, Len.
Zoom around the room, looking at the neon.
The live.
No.
Oh, Mountie Mo and Jack.
Hello, Sandy.
Oh, hello, Vicky.
Well, now everybody can hear us.
I'm muting myself.
Please, you good people, return to mute now.
Hello. Goodbye.
Goodbye. I promise there will be social time later.
Yes, yes. Levis sign, Levis hair pair. Yes, yes.
This is Lenny Davidson's, huh?
Oh, we can make some of these go on. Now, I should note that the most of the neon is on motion detectors. So to turn it off and on, that's going to be Sam's job today because he's the biggest one of us. So the motion detectors will detect him more easily than anybody else. So as we talk about signs, if the signs are not on, we'll send Sam over to be seen by the sign. And as we talk about these things, Mason is going to be posing questions to me, referring your questions, just tuning me up, keeping me going. So what I'd like to start with is just a little bit of a discussion of the signs. We have over 90 signs in this room, and we have another 25 or so out in the common area of NextFab. And one of the great things about the signs, beyond the beauty and the folk art element of these signs, is that they all have a story. And just to pick a sign, not at random, but the one that I think first caught my eye when I was around 10 years old is this Levis's hot dog sign. So Alyssa, if you could focus on Levis's hot dog and the story behind that sign, there's a lot of stories behind Levis's, but this was a business in Philadelphia that was opened in 1895. And I first became aware of the Levis's hot dog when I was about 10 years old. And I used to go to Philadelphia Warriors basketball games in the 1950s with my father. And after the games, which were just incredible because we hated the Celtics and the Warriors would play the Celtics, who were their rivals, we would drive over to Levis's, turn down Market Street, and then about 6 blocks away near South Street would be the hot dog. So we drive up 6th Street, and the hot dog looked tiny from 6 blocks away, but it would get bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time we got there, I was overwhelmed by this 13-foot hot dog. So I don't think that I'd be involved in neon today, or that if there'd even be a neon museum if it wasn't for the Levis's hot dog. Close to the Levis's hot dog is one of the other signs that I'd like to point out, which is the Bullivo Watches clock. This was one of our oldest signs. Oh, we need to trip that one again. It went off. And there were at least 4 of these clocks that were at the New York World's Fair. And I'm talking about the 1939 New York World's Fair. And we don't know why, but they came to Philadelphia after the fair and they were installed above jewelry stores in Philadelphia. So when I moved back to Philly in 1979, I started roaming around the city looking at old signs, and there was this decrepit Bullivo Watch sign that I noticed on North Broad Street by Germantown Avenue. And I kind of lusted after it, even though it didn't light up. It had peeling paint, but it looked amazing. And eventually my next door neighbor here in the building we are now, Bob Beatty, his salvage company took down this Bullivo clock, and one of my fellow dumpster divers did the paint job on the clock, and we restored it. And we're very proud to have this as part of the museum. So there's, like I said, there's 90 other signs that I could tell you stories about. I wonder if Mason, you have a favorite that you want me to talk to, or?
Oh yeah, I'd there are a few that I think are like just my absolutely favorite.
Okay.
I think I'd love to focus on some of the animated signs. So
Animated signs,
my
sure.
personal favorite is the dancing crab.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about the dancing crab. Oh, you got it to dance. That's a relatively new sign. That was made for a restaurant called Route 6, which is a highway up in New England. And the sign was made for that restaurant, which was on North Broad Street in Philadelphia. It was part of Stephen Starr's empire. He's a famous restaurateur in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, for Stephen, that restaurant didn't really succeed, but fortunately for the Neon Museum, when new owners took it over, they didn't need the dancing crab anymore, and they donated it to the museum. I restored it, and the rest is history. So we're very proud of having that particular animation, along with a lot of other animated signs. Like, I know that at least 2 of Joe Feldman's daughters are here, and Joe is perhaps the most famous sign maker in Philadelphia. And one of his great signs is this other animated sign, this hair replacement center sign. This was on Ridge Avenue in Philadelphia. And I like to think of these signs as folk art. And part of the reason that they're folk art is that the people who made these neon signs were typically not trained in fine art. But at the time when neon signs started proliferating between the 1930s and the 1950s, it was the golden age of comic strips. There was a lot of cartooning being done. And there were tons of mom and pop businesses. So the idea for many of these signs came from the sign maker's own creativity or from the mom and pop businesses. So I just don't think that conceiving of a hair replacement center with a man with a toupee and a before and after is something that a fine artist would typically think of. But we're very happy that there were so many of these wonderful local folk artists in Philadelphia and across the country who came up with these kinds of designs.
Yeah, it's very cool how creative it is, and just I'd love to know more about the process of making that animated in the first place. Like how is that done?
Yeah, well, that's a relatively simple animation because it's a 2-point animation. So there's actually 3 transformers. One transformer is on all the time, which is for the figure and the words hair replacement center. But you've got 2 separate transformers, and in this case, an electronic animator that switches the words before and then after on in a sequence. Back in the day, we didn't have electronic animators. We had mechanical animators that had fingers that would go up and down. You'd have to cut cams on a small kind of engine, and the cams, the way they were cut, would time so that you could order the sequence of the animation to work, according to the pattern that you wanted. Now it's a lot easier. Now you simply fill out kind of a grid, figure out what transformer you want on for what period of time, and send it off, and a company that I use, Tech22, wonderful company in California, will make you an electronic animator. Another one I should point out, which might be a little bit hard to photograph, is my personal favorite animation, which is the Swartz camera. You have to go into the corner there, Sam, to get that one to trip. There we go. And that's a 4-point animation. So we talked about how there were 2 transformers going off and on for the hair replacement center. Here there's 4 different transformers that go off and on to create the illusion of an aperture opening and closing. And that sign was made in the 1950s, around 1955. And it survived Hurricane Hazel, but that kind of blew out a lot of the neon. And the sign was in a friend's studio for a period. It was in Jim Graham's photo studio for a while, and then we finally took the sign back and did some restoration on it, and now we're proud to have it here in the Neon Museum.
So I was looking at the Horn and Hard Art sign, and I have 2 questions. So one, I'd just love to know more about Horn and Hard Art, but also I noticed on the sign that some of the letters are brighter than others, and so I think I'd be interested to know, like, why is that the case, and so why is it uneven?
Yeah, well, Horn and Hard Art, that sign was made in the 1950s, and that was at 30th Street Station in Philadelphia. Horn and Hard Art itself started, I believe, in the 1880s or the 1890s in Philadelphia and became a fantastic success. They were very well known for their automats where you stuck nickels into slots and you get your baked beans or your mashed potatoes or whatever it was that you were ordering. But at one point, Horn and Hardart's had over 70 restaurants just in Philadelphia. This is in the 1930s. I once saw a brochure listing over 70 restaurants, and the restaurants were of three types. They had sit-down restaurants, they had automats, and then they had what this one was, which was a take-home restaurant. Commuters would come through 30th Street. They want to pick up something to bring home for dinner. So they called these things retail shops. And Horn and Hardart spread through the East Coast. Eventually there were a lot more of them in New York than there were in Philadelphia. But I guess by the 1970s, I could look and give you the exact dates. One of the things we're going to talk about soon is our guide cards. We've got write-ups about all of these signs. So you don't have to just rely on my faulty memory when you come to Neon Museum. You'll be able to actually see what date did Horn and Hardart's open? When did they close exactly? Because it's all written up on our museum guide cards. Now, as far as Mason's other question, when we got the sign, we were able to get the original stainless steel letters. We got the original glass tubing, which was really very finely made because these are small channels that have triple stroke neon in it, which is a difficult kind of thing to do within the confines of those channels. But the reason that three of the letters are brighter than the others, the N, the T, and a bit of the R, is that those were broken. So we had to either make those new or restore them. And when you're making up neon tubes that have argon gas with mercury in them, the older tubes tend to lose some of their brightness over time. The mercury tends to stain, and when you get a new neon tube that has argon and mercury in it, it tends to be much brighter. So the T is obviously a new tube. A bit of the R was a spliced piece of new tube with an old tube that we were able to salvage. Right below it, though, we ought to talk about another of Joe Feldman's signs, which is Pat Steaks. And when you start talking about businesses like Horn and Hardart or Pat Steaks or Pep Boys or Levis's, there's almost a sense of that these are, I guess you'd say, kind of sacred businesses in Philadelphia. People of a certain age who grew up with these places, they're more than signs. They're markers of place. They're markers of one's experiences in the city of Philadelphia, and which is one of the wonderful things about neon signs is that they're symbols for people. They're not just beautiful pieces of glass. They have attachments of memory. For one of the things when I was talking about Levis's before, one of the things to give you an example of that was so powerful for me was not just that my dad used to take me to Levis's, his father took him to Levis's, and I used to take my son to Levis's. So there's a generational kind of relationship that people have with the sons. Anyway, we were talking about Pat's Steaks. Pat's is one of the most famous businesses in Philly, one of the most famous restaurants. It was founded supposedly in the year 1930 in South Philadelphia. And there were offshoots of that stand from the 1930s. Eventually, they opened up a location in Strawberry Mansion, which is another neighborhood in Philadelphia. And they put a gigantic sign up on the roof of a 3-story building. So this was only part of the sign. And Sam, if you would just kind of do the Vanna White thing and point some things out. This sign had 39 neon tubes on it originally. So each of those holes are housings they're housings for neon tubes. So every time there's a pair of housings, that indicated that there was neon tube. So you could see where the blue porcelain is, there were blue diamonds. And where the red porcelain is, there were red rubies, and so on. Well, when we took the sign down, again with my dumpster diver art group in Philadelphia, many years ago and salvaged the sign. There were only these two neon tubes left, one little green emerald and one small little blue diamond. And we haven't restored the sign yet, in part because it would be hugely expensive to restore a sign like this. The reason being that there were 39 tubes on the sign originally. And I call them old timers. Now I'm an old timer, but the people who I met when I moved back to Philadelphia told me that you used to be able to see this sign from airplanes. And it's very believable because there were 39 tubes illuminating this one sign. And below the Pat Steak sign was another sign which was just as big, which said pioneer and originator of the cheesesteak. Judy, if you could grab a postcard up at the top there, there's a Pat Steaks postcard. And maybe this will show up on the camera. So you could see that was the Pat Steaks crown when it was in Strawberry Mansion, and you could see the pioneer and originator below. Jeremy, is that coming out? Can you see that?
Yes, I can see that just fine.
Okay, great. So you can imagine how bright the sign was. And I've been trying to find a photo of the sign with the neon on it. This photo was taken in the 1980s when most of the neon was long gone. But I would eventually like to restore the sign. And part of the problem with the restoration is that you can be an archaeologist and you could figure out where the diamonds and rubies and so on were. But if you look in the middle of the sign, there are a dozen or so housings that don't correspond to any particular obvious piece of neon. And we don't know what those housings were for, although some people have said to me, it used to say Pat's in the middle. And others have said, not only did it say Pat's, but it was animated. So that it would go P-A-T and so on. So when I eventually find a photo, and somebody out there who's watching probably went to Pat Steaks in Strawberry Mansion, or their parents did, or their grandparents did, and they probably posed underneath the sign. So somebody's got to have that photo. And once we have the photo and we could see the original neon, then we'll be able to do more accurate restoration of that sign.
Yeah, I mean, these, they almost have mythological qualities to them.
Yes.
Because, you know, it's all based off of stories that you've heard. Are there any signs where you've really wanted to be able to see what a sign may have looked like in Philly for a business that you never got to see? You just hear from people that it was a hell of a sign.
Yeah, there are legendary signs that I've heard about. Getting back to Joe Feldman, who ran Ajax Signs, and he actually made the Pat Steak sign, the Levis's hot dog, the hair replacement center sign. One of Joe's most famous signs was one for a place called the Red Robin, and this was on Columbia Avenue. They've changed the name to
Cecil B. Moore.
Cecil B. Moore now. But Columbia Avenue was known for having lots of bars and restaurants, and Joe did all kinds of work on Columbia, and then he also did a lot of work on Ridge Avenue, which also had lots of jazz bars, restaurants, clubs, that sort of thing. Anyway, the Red Robin, legend goes, in that it's legend because I've never seen it, was supposed to have been a bird, a double-sided neon bird that bent over, just like the toy does, bent over into a cocktail glass, drank from the cocktail glass, and then stood up again. So this would be an incredible sign, but I don't know exactly what it looked like. How long did it take it to bend over? How many points of animation were there? Did bubbles come up from the cocktail glass? We don't know. And unfortunately, Joe's pattern room burned down years ago. I had spoken to him about this, and I'll never see either the sign or the pattern, but again, hopefully someone's got a photograph of the Red Robin. So it's true, these things do become myths. They become mythological.
Yeah, and you know, just to think too that you talk about, you know, what Ridge Avenue was like, what's you know, Columbia, now Cecil B. Moore is like. What are some of these commercial corridors that must have been spectacular neon sights when you were walking down these corridors, and kind of what do you miss the most?
Well, I miss the city of Philadelphia, frankly. I miss commercial corridors in general. one of the things that is important about this Neon Museum for me is that Philadelphia used to be a place full of mom and pop stores. Every 5-6 blocks going through North and South Philadelphia, you would come to another commercial strip. I have my friend Joel Spivak loaned me his phone book from 1956, and it just amazes you when you start paging through the phone book and you could look up paint stores, or you could look up soda fountains, or basically anything. And there will be dozens and dozens of these mom and pop businesses. So what the museum is about is not just the signs, but the history behind them. And when I say I miss Philadelphia, part of what I miss about Philadelphia is that we don't have lots of commercial corridors anymore. People don't do shopping typically by walking out and going to corner stores, going to corner strips. We don't have kids playing in the streets. You've got your deliveries through Amazon. So with the advent of computers and computerization, the city and the world has basically changed dramatically, for better or worse. There have been wonderful aspects of computerization and of home deliveries and all these things that are allowing me to talk to you right now, for instance. But on the other hand, we've lost a lot of that personal feeling. So part of the idea of this Neon Museum is that we want it to be a hangout where people can come and they can tell their stories, where we're not so much interested in nostalgia, we're interested in culture. So when people move to Philadelphia, it's kind of amazing to me, and I think to a lot of older Philadelphians, that they have very little sense of what a row house city is supposed to be like. The idea of sitting out on your stoops, getting to know your neighbors, walking to the corner store. These are things that are disappearing in Philadelphia. At one point I wanted to make a series of cards for stoop sitters, just like you would have baseball cards. The neighborhood I lived in, 25 years ago, which is not far from where I live now, Fairmount in Philadelphia. One of the things I used to love about the street that I lived on was we would go out onto the sidewalk, and whenever you went out, there were people on the street. And typically there were a couple of old ladies who'd be sitting out on the street, and they were watching the street, and they made it a more friendly kind of a place. So at one point, I think around 7-8 years ago, I had the idea, well, let's memorialize these people who sit out on the stoops in Philadelphia. And I started roaming around Fairmount, and I talked to the corner drugstore that's still there and said, who still sits out on stoops? And we couldn't find anybody. So it's one of the losses of city living. And one of the things I try and do every summer is I try and sit out. And I think I'm helping to perpetuate a little bit of Philadelphia culture by sitting out on the stoops and talking to my neighbors.
Yeah, I think, through efforts, even just through the Neon Museum, we can, bit by bit bring this back. And, I know you've told me before that, I've moved to Philadelphia. I've been living here for a little over 5 years. And so I really have no idea of what I've missed. I've only heard things, but just being able to talk to people like you and others about what I've missed inspires me to do whatever I can to bring it back. And, I'm going to be sitting on my stoop myself. But, the other thing I think that, Neon kind of represents, is this mom and pop, very local business creativity. And the other thing that we've lost is the third place, where, people can go to a bar or a hangout joint, and, you have neon signs that represent that. I mean, one that I really take to is the Goat Hollow sign. Over there, because that really seems just like very representative of what the third place is.
I believe that's true. Goat Hollow is in a neighborhood, or was in a neighborhood called Mount Airy. And it was more than a bar and restaurant. I went to Goat Hollow, but I didn't live in Mount Airy. Locals talk about going to Goat Hollow because it was both bar and restaurant, but they also had music there. They also had poetry. They had events. They did catering. It was a hangout. And those kind of third place hangouts are something that we cherish in Philadelphia. Sometimes I think of South Philadelphia as kind of a museum of dive bars. You know, we've got lots of local bars in Philly. And we're looking for this Neon Museum to become a third place. We've got a membership structure, and we're hoping that people will come here and hang out in the Neon Museum. Let me show you some of the features of the museum. One of the hangout aspects of the museum is that we've got a library and a lounge. And Judy, maybe you should turn the lights on for this so we'll illuminate this part of the museum a little bit more. But we've got books on neon, on Philadelphia history, and on roadside America, and other related kinds of fields like folk art, for instance. So one of the things that you can do when you come to the museum, whether you're a member or if you're just a paid visitor here, is you could sit in our lounge, you can browse through our library, you can get in discussions or arguments with other people. It'll be a place for you to hang out, just like a bar would be a place to hang out. Only the focus, we would hope, would be a little bit more about the city of Philadelphia and about Philly history and about art. So that's one feature I want to point out. Another one is that we're going to have changing art shows here. And in fact, it's not really a coincidence, but Mason, who's been asking me some of these questions, is an artist and is kind of a folk artist. He's self-taught. And our first of many changing art exhibits is Mason's work, which you can see here on, these are movable walls that we've set up. So we've got 3 double-sided movable walls. And Mason, why don't you speak for a couple minutes about this art? Mason is, I should say, the mayor of an imaginary city called Blandini. Take it away.
Oh yeah, so it is an imaginary city in the future. The city was founded in 2073. All the drawings here take place in the year 2140. And it's a city where all the buildings are alive and have their own distinct personalities. And it's also a city that I've constructed where it's a future that's actually more human. You know, there's, you know, I think there are things that are going to be happening throughout the time between now and Blandini that will lead to people wanting a city that is more local and neighborly focused again, and you know, kind of has this sort of row house culture that Philadelphia has lost. I'm bringing it back into the future through Blandini, and so I have 38 different drawings in this exhibit of various sizes. Some are of individual buildings, others are in the neighborhoods. I've actually done an entire transit map of the city too, so you can see where all the neighborhoods are and how they're all laid out. And so at the Neon Museum, you'll be able to see like a building or a neighborhood, and you'll be able to read a description of it. So I've come up with stories of each place. And so, you know, I think that whether you are just, I hope you're entranced by the imagery, but half of it is the stories too. And so anybody that, you know, becomes a founding member of the museum can get a personal tour here. You know, we're not open to the general public yet, but, you know, you'll be able to get a personal tour and be able to not just get a tour of the Neon Museum, but also get a tour of Blandini.
Thanks very much. I should point out that another feature of the museum is that we have a store, and we've got some of Mason's prints of his Blandini neighborhoods in our museum store, and some of the other things that we're just stocking the store at this point. But we've also got books on neon. We've got old Philadelphia bottles for sale. We have some jewelry, typewriter key jewelry, neon postcards. And we even sell dead box, which is something that I'll get to a little bit later. Oh, t-shirts too, obviously, Neon Museum t-shirts. And when you become a member, you at certain membership levels, you get t-shirts with it. I wanted to point out a couple other features of the Neon Museum, and then we'll just open it up to questions.
Yeah.
So one of the things I had spoken about before was that we have museum guides. So when you look at any wall of the museum, and they're all labeled wall alphabetically, A, B, C, D, and so on. If you're curious about a sign, so you wanted to learn more about the beauty salon sign or the Fortune Shoes for Men sign over here, that would be wall E. So you'd find the guide card for wall E, and then there's a whole story about the beauty salon silhouette, and then another story about Fortune Shoes. So in addition to the signs, we're trying to amplify the history, the cultural context of the signs. And one of the things that you'll notice is that we reserve the areas below the signs for memorabilia. So we've got photographs, we've got ads. Over here on wall F, we have a couple of signs from Philco, where it says Philco, a musical instrument of quality, and then we've got a Philco clock. Philco was a major manufacturer in Philadelphia. They were the leading manufacturer of radios. They were the leading manufacturer of radios in Philadelphia, in the United States, actually, from 1930 through 1954. And they weren't far from here. They had about 4 square blocks of factories, a mile, 2 miles north of where this museum is. So we've got a Philco ad below that musical instrument of quality sign. And when I first got the sign, I was wondering what they were referring to when they said Philco musical instruments of quality, because I knew Philco made refrigerators and freezers and TVs and radios, but I didn't think they made musical instruments. And once I got the ad, I realized that they called their radios musical instruments of quality. That's how they advertised. One last feature that I want to point out is, as part of getting this history and getting this cultural context, when you come into the museum, if you know something about one of our signs, or your grandfather started one of these businesses, or your mom worked at Horn and Hardart, or whatever it might be, we have 3x5 cards, and we'd like people to fill out their stories. So if you go over to wall E, you can see that a couple of people have been in here and they've written stories about signs that are on wall E. I'd walk over there, but I'd be out of the range of the microphone. So you can probably focus on that and get a sense of it. So we're very interested in collecting oral history at the museum, and collecting more memorabilia. So if you've got more information about one of our signs, we'd like to hear about it. So I sort of have grown tired of listening to myself talk, and I wonder if there are questions that people have sent in to us.
Oh, yes, we do have questions.
We do have questions, okay.
Yeah.
So why don't
so we'll get to hear
why don't we make it a
yourself
little bit
talk.
more interactive at this point?
Lauren Howard asks, what kinds of events can we expect from the museum in the future? Very cool space and amazing collection.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the events are limited only by your imagination. We've set this space up so that most everything is on casters and could be moved around. So I don't know if we could have full-blown weddings, but we might have very small weddings here. And beyond that, we could have talks, we could have demonstrations, we could have musical performances, we could have photo shoots. We can set the space up for whatever we need to set it up for. And in fact, today we just got some microphones that were given to us. And how would we use those? Alyssa?
They're wireless microphones, so they're like lavalier microphones. So if you want to come in and do a presentation, we'll make sure everyone can hear you here, and it gives us some mobility to really play with the space in that way.
Yeah. So yeah, we're looking to make this into an event space. And if we do have events that are larger than we can accommodate here at the Neon Museum space itself, we are a tenant of a larger organization called NextFab, NextFab has a big lobby just down the hall from us. We've put, as I said, 25 of our neon signs in that hallway, and we have permission to occasionally take over NextFab's lobby for big events. So if there's something larger than we can accommodate here, we might be able to deal with it over at
Pretty
at
spacious.
NextFab's lobby. Yeah.
Yeah, it fit a lot. Christopher asks, does anyone remember the Whale Nicholas Pool sign in Levittown?
I don't. Do any of you guys? If I don't think anybody else will here, but maybe somebody who's tuned in will know something about it.
And Mitchell
Sorry.
asks, remember the Philly Neon Museum exhibit at Philadelphia Community College about 25 to 30 years ago?
Absolutely. My wife used to work at Philadelphia Community College, and I remember how wonderful it was to set up that exhibit and how depressing it was at the same time, because I put up 50 neon signs inside of this giant rotunda in Community College and slaved away, and we had a fabulous exhibit. And then after I think 1 month or 2 months, it was time to take them down. And schlepping neon signs around is not the most fun thing. So finally, I got a space here where I don't have to take these down next month. These are going to stay here, hopefully way beyond my tenure on this planet. Right now, we're a for-profit organization, which is not making any money, but eventually it's going to become a nonprofit, and we'll be able to get funding, hopefully, for nonprofit activities. And the idea of the museum is that we'll keep functioning for many, many years. Self-sustaining. Thank you, Sam. Yeah.
Barbara would like to know about the orgasm sign over there.
Oh, somebody want to trick that one into going on? There we go. So that sign was made by a Philadelphia artist named Anson Kenny. He's a really fascinating character. He grew up in a tough neighborhood in Juniata Park in Philadelphia, and he became kind of an intellectual. Oh, we could keep this over here, Sam. He was unusual as an artist in that he was equally at home in museums. He had exhibits at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, for instance, but he was also known as a street fighter, and he'd get into brawls, and he enjoyed fighting. And we have a brochure about an exhibit of Anson's neon work that took place, I'd say, maybe 15 to 20 years ago at Moore College of Art. And Anson had died on a New Year's Eve, I believe. And Arthur Sabatini, a local Philadelphian friend of Anson and an art curator, took over Anson's collection and spoke with Moore College, and they set up this wonderful exhibit. And we were able to put that up. So one of the things that Anson was interested in was plays on language. So Orgasma, I think, is kind of an interesting play on language. And he used, for you neon aficionados, he used old ruby red glass. So it's got a very deep color to it.
Oscar would like to know, are there any signs in the city that still need to be saved, that are still in situ or vulnerable?
Well, one of the greatest signs ever made in Philadelphia, the Boot and Saddle Bar, was restored a few years ago, and then the Boot and Saddle recently closed. And we're hoping that the sign will be relit again. I don't think the sign's been damaged yet. It was working fine when the bar was open. But that's probably one of the three greatest signs ever made in Philadelphia. The Boot and Saddle is about a 20-foot tall sign made by an Italian immigrant in South Philly who had a 6th grade education. He sketched out the whole idea for it on his counter in his kitchen. And I don't have a picture of it to show you, but that's one that is somewhat endangered because it's not an active business right now. Another one that's really very important is in Bensalem, which would be the Giles and Ransom bulldozer. Giles and Ransom was a heavy equipment manufacturer in Philadelphia, and they had their headquarters on Hunting Park Avenue. Yes, Sam, if you could give me a postcard of that one. So this was an animated sign where the driver shifted gears and the tractor treads would run around, and then he'd shift gears again and they would stop. And Giles and Ransom was recently sold within the last couple of years to another heavy equipment manufacturer, and I don't know if they're going to be maintaining that sign or not. But that one is, it's amazing because the driver himself is life-size, and it's double-sided, and it's all porcelain enamel with stainless steel cases, and it's just a magnificent piece of craftsmanship. You won't see new signs made like the Giles and Ransom anymore.
You're making me want to take a trip to Ben Salem. I didn't know about that.
And hopefully the sign will be lit up there. Yeah.
I see it every time I drive home here.
Yeah, when you drive on the New Jersey Turnpike, you could see that sign if it's still working.
So Grace wants to know about the daily features.
Well, that's something that I salvaged from Second Street. In Philadelphia, on Second Street north of Market, there are maybe 5 to 10 at various points in time, different restaurant supply companies. And I mean, the story itself is not that interesting, but I had gotten some old napkin holders, like diner napkin holders, and needed to get these 1950s style napkins. So I went to the restaurant supplies, and a guy found me a case of old napkins, and he also had some old signs there that he didn't need anymore. So I don't know what that sign came from, but I purchased it at the time, and it ends up being a good facade for our counter over here. You know, before we take more questions, I'm thinking of one other aspect of the museum. There's probably many that I've forgotten, but one other aspect that I would like to spend a little bit of time on, and that's Deadbox. We interrupted a Deadbox game to start this presentation. Alyssa and I were in the midst of a Deadbox game. Let me find a bottle top. Here we go. So as I was talking about how Philly has changed, one of the big changes, as I was saying, is that kids used to play in the street. So Deadbox was a Philadelphia street game. It was chalked on the street, and it didn't take very much other than some chalk and some bottle tops. And you would weigh the bottle tops down with some wax or some crayons, and then you'd shoot from one number to the next. And it's really a game of skill, and it takes maybe 30 seconds to learn how to play, but to get good could take a lifetime. And one of my inspirations some years ago was to try and bring back Deadbox. And I'm still trying to bring back Deadbox. And I made up these Deadbox mats. And so they're not just numbers with squares, but we also put in Philadelphia images that correspond to each of the numbers. So just a little demo of some Deadbox is you shoot from number 1 through number 14. We used to play, you'd shoot up to 14 and then you go back again to 1. It gets very complex, but the idea is just that you have to flick the bottle top and try and get it into the next box. So I'm going for 2 now. So that's not too bad a shot, but when I was better at this and younger, I could get right into 2 immediately. Then the next player would go, and that player would be shooting for number 2. And if you hit the other person's bottle top, you automatically would get into 2, or you could try and get into 2 just with a straight shot. So rather than go into the rules and do an elaborate exposition on Deadbox, I just want you to know that when you come to the Neon Museum, one of the things you can do, besides hanging out at our lounge, looking at our signs, reading our guide cards, is you can get into a game of Deadbox here. And it's all part of that idea of preserving and recognizing Philadelphia culture. Deadbox is one of many, many street games. You know, now kids typically have play dates. They don't play out in the streets. Mom calls somebody else's mom and you go for a play date over somebody's house. I'm sure that's got its advantages and disadvantages, but the idea of being able to be creative, make up your own games with your friends down the street is something that I think has been lost in Philadelphia. And we're not going to be able to bring that back totally, but I did get an email today from someone who is involved in Halfball League. Halfball is another old Philadelphia street game. Do you know about Halfball, Mason?
I don't know.
Okay, so new people to Philadelphia don't know about halfball, box ball, wire ball, wall ball, dead box, all these kinds of things. And hopefully, come to the Neon Museum, you'll learn a little bit more about Philadelphia culture.
Yeah.
So what else do people want to know?
So, somebody would like to know how old the McGillen sign is.
I believe the McGillen sign was made in the 1950s, but McGillen's is the oldest bar in Philadelphia, and they are a history museum themselves. When you go into McGillen's, they've got old signs there, they've got old licenses. The issue with this particular sign was that it was an outdoor double-sided sign, and they were having some trouble maintaining it, and they decided that rather than continuing to replace glass and replace transformers, they would make up a new sign. So fortuitous for us, we've done some work with McGillen's, and they asked if I wanted the sign, and I was able to get the sign and then do the restoration. And now it's here. So we've got this original 1950 sign, and hopefully it'll be here for a long, long time. Jeremy?
Yeah.
Hi, Jeremy. Do you see the questions?
There are plenty of questions. Would you like one?
Yeah, I'd love them.
Okay, I'm just going to randomly choose one. Actually, you know what? Sandra has had her hand up very politely for some time, and I'm trying to find her question. I can't find it. Sandra, would you like to come off mute and tell us what your question is? Sandra, can you hear me? No? This is
Yes, I hear you.
Hi,
Yeah.
I was looking for your question. I saw your hand raised. I don't know if you've written out a question, but would you like to ask Lynn a question?
Oh, I was trying to answer the question though about Violet. Someone named Violet asked about the hair pair, hair replacement one. And I thought it was Green Lane, Ornbridge Avenue near Green, or maybe it was Walnut Lane. And it was kind of diagonally across from the Bob's Diner.
Oh, yes, right by the cemetery.
Yeah, that's right, across from Ornbridge Avenue, across from the cemetery.
Yeah.
So
That's where
Yeah.
the hair replacement center is from.
That's what we're
Yes,
describing.
yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Someone
Yeah,
had
that-
asked, Len, someone had asked in the questions where that was located on Ridge Avenue.
Right.
And
it
Sandra
on
was
Woodland Avenue,
answering
right by
that
Bob's
question.
Diner. And in
right,
fact,
right.
a person got that sign and brought it into me for repair. And I told him what it would cost to repair it, and he didn't feel it was worth it. So I bought the sign from him.
Yes.
I've
Yes.
gotten signs in so many different ways. You know, some have come from across the country, some have come from eBay, some I've traded for. There's just infinite ways that you can accumulate neon signs. I do want to talk about.
Len, I do have one quick question. Are you aware of the Gingham House restaurant sign in the Northeast and whatever happened to that?
Where in the Northeast was Gingham House?
On Castor Avenue, around just north of Levick Street.
Oh, yeah. Well, I grew up near there, but I don't particularly recall the sign. Was it an interesting neon sign?
I don't know. It was so interesting. It had the painted part. The background was gingham. It was.
Oh, it actually was Gingham.
It was a gingham painted background, a vertical sign.
Oh, well, that'd be kind of interesting. That sounds sort of unique. I want to point out another kind of sign that's unique, but I don't want to go too far away. I've been talking a little bit about dumpster divers, and this is an art group in Philadelphia. Friends of mine, we started this over 25 years ago, and it's people who take found objects and make art. So some of what I do is do neon pieces with found objects. And I just wanted to point to these two sculptures over here. Oh, we can walk over?
Point towards us. Talk to us.
So this one is called Gnome on the Range. And I have great affection for this piece, partly because I made it and another dumpster diver bought the sign. Burnell and Betsy in the Dumpster Divers bought the sign and kept it in their house, and their house is just full of wonderful artwork. And every time I would go over and visit them, I would look at my No More on the Range sign, and I'd pine away and say, oh, I miss the sign so much. So they finally just donated it back to the museum. And the other one is Queen of the Gnomes. Once I took a trip through the Midwest and got very into gnomes and sprites and 25 other names for these kind of things. What are the other names, Judy? Pixies, fairies, elves, yeah. So, and Sam is from the Midwest, so you probably grew up with people who were like gnome makers and elf makers.
A lot of Scandinavian folklore.
Heritage, yeah. So, so I started doing a series of gnome related neon found object pieces. So let's go back to the questions. Enough on my found objects.
Somebody asked about the Dobbs D sign.
Which sign?
The Dobbs.
Oh, let's go look at that. Yeah. Is this working, the remote microphone? Okay, good. So.
Yeah, talk towards the mic though.
Yeah, so Dobbs was a bar at 3rd and South. South is the hippest street in town in Philadelphia. There was a song by the Orlons. So South Street has a long history. It used to be a Jewish fabric district and restaurant district and wedding bridal district. And in the 1960s, one of the things actually previously people had asked about kinds of presentations and things that we'll be doing at the museum. One of them is that we'll be talking about some of the history of South Street. My friend Joel, who I mentioned before, has been researching South Street for many years, and we want to have him in here to get into South Street history. So this is just one of many signs that we have that were from South Street. This D was from a store called Diamond Furniture that was on South Street. And it ended up in a store called Rosebud. Dobbs wanted the D for, Dobbs wanted the D for their stage. So they have closed and they since have donated the D to us. And Dobbs was on the 2nd floor. So as you walked up the staircase, along the walls of the 2nd floor, they would have pictures of performers who had appeared at Dobbs. And amazingly, for this sort of little kind of rot gut bar, I say that affectionately though, they had amazing people there. So Nirvana appeared at Dobbs, Smashing Pumpkins, Jeff Buckley, Dwight Yoakam, Taj Mahal, it goes on and on. So they were generous enough to give us the D and then also give us some of these photos. And when we do our program on South Street, we'll be talking about some of the other signs that we have from South Street at that point too.
Levis's.
Why don't we go back to the center again and we can put the mic down, keep it stationary. So ask me anything.
Yeah, what is the original location from the Sunray sign behind you?
Oh,
And if you could repeat that question, I don't know if they can hear me.
yeah, so I'll repeat the question. The question is about the original location of the Sunray sign. I'm not sure. Sunray was a drugstore chain that started in Philadelphia, and there were a number of those signs. I saw one of those signs at around 52nd and Spruce Street at one point, but there were several of these kind of signs, and they were very into neon signage. They did animated signs. They had a much larger one on Broad Street, and their most famous animated sign was at 12th and Market across from the PSFS building, which had a giant Sunray sign with chasing lines of light that wrapped around the corner of the building. So this particular one I found in a salvage store, Architectural Antiques Exchange in Philadelphia. It didn't have any of the neon on it, but it was pretty easy to figure out what the neon looked like. And I restored it. Excuse me for a second. um,
Sounds like you might
get
need
some water or some
champagne.
wine? Yes, let's take a little wine break.
Let's zoom into that sun ray.
Yeah, great. Okay.
How did you decide what signs go in specific spaces?
We looked for what fit in the spaces. So the largest signs we put above the walls. So on one side, we have 10-foot high walls. On the other side, we have 15-foot high walls. The biggest metal signs we thought would be good if we had them up high where people could see them throughout the building. Whereas the smaller signs we wanted to locate on the walls themselves. The metal signs are heavy, they're often double-sided, so they don't really fit on a wall that well.
Also structurally, there's a lot easier,
And-
safer to hang.
Yeah, so what Sam is pointing out is that structurally, we have really heavy beams running atop these walls. So that helped us make the decision about putting the large, heavy signs up above the walls where structurally they could hang from the beams. And then we just kind of fit signs onto the wall spaces. You know, we had some ideas that, for instance, over on wall A, we did a lot of automobile-related signs. We have kind of entertainment-oriented signs over on wall G, but we didn't really stick closely to those delineations. So there might be some gathering together of similar theme signs, but that's not really the case throughout. It was just whatever looked good. We tried to balance out colors so that you'd have a lot of varied colors on each wall. And
How do you
there wasn't a great deal of careful calculation about placement of signs on walls.
how do you keep the signs safe from visitors?
Well, so far we don't have any visitors. If you didn't hear the question, it was how do we keep the signs safe from visitors? Most of the signs are fairly high up. There are only the two signs that are really down low, the Sunray drug sign and the Howard Johnson's lamplighter sign. We haven't really faced that question yet. You know, we're going to ask everybody to not touch the signs when they come in. So far, the people who have come in have been members, friends. They know enough not to touch the signs. But once we have little kids in here, it may become more of a dilemma. And we might have to put up bollards, portable kinds of things to keep people away. We don't know yet. I've been to other neon museums that have signs out that are within within arm's reach. You could touch those signs. And in fact, when I went to the American Sign Museum in Cincinnati for a conference at one point, someone leaned back and they ended up breaking a sign. So it is something that could happen. And it is of concern, but we'll face that hurdle once we start having visitors come in larger numbers. Mason, you might be able to read these things off of.
Yeah.
Yeah, here, I could actually probably even set this up
Okay.
so we can kind of give my arms a break. I'll do this and see it's here. It's kind of hard to see.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Okay,
a
so
transition, actually.
Drew would like to know, Las Vegas is known for its neon. Are there any other cities that have a noteworthy neon history?
Nice question. The city that I think has the most fantastic neon history that most people don't know about is Vancouver, Canada. And we have a film which reminds me of one of the other things that we're going to be doing here at the Neon Museum is we're going to have a film archive and film programs. We have a film called Glowing in the Dark, which is a documentary about the history of neon in Vancouver. It's little known, but at one point, I don't know if this is legend or fact, supposedly there was one neon sign for every 19 residents or every 18 residents of Vancouver. So the city was just awash in neon. And when you see this film, which you'll see at the Neon Museum, you'll be amazed. I was out in Los Angeles about a year ago, and LA has a wonderful history of neon signs too, and a wonderful museum, the Museum of Neon Art.
New York.
But yeah, I'm being prompted to talk about New York. Yeah,
Miami.
because Judy, I guess, came from New York, right? But yeah, New York also has fabulous neon history. I wish that there was a museum preserving neon signs of New York, but there's a book which we have up for sale here called Neon New York, which documents a lot of the remaining signs in New York City. So, you know, when the neon was developed in the 1920s by George Claude, and he franchised his invention, which I don't really want to get into the whole history of neon at this point, but the point I'm getting at was that neon signs and franchises went around the world. So there were franchises in Los Angeles, there were franchises in New York City, there were franchises in the East, in Hong Kong and Tokyo and so on. So lots of large major cities had neon histories that went back into the 1920s and 1930s. Those are the cities with the really wonderful neon histories. I assume that Vancouver signs must have started in that same period too. But I know that in the 1950s, Vancouver signs were really wonderful.
Yeah.
And the point that you were getting me to think about before relates to Alyssa's work. We've gotten over 100 videos and PowerPoints on our three major areas of interest, which would be, as I said before, neon, Philadelphia history, and roadside America. So people have been sending these things into us from across the world, really, mostly from the United States. And another thing that will happen when you come to the Neon Museum and it's open to the public is that every day we will have a video program. So, you know, it'll say at 12 o'clock, we're showing a half an hour video on trolleys in Philadelphia. And at 2 o'clock, we'll have a film on Vancouver's neon signs. And at 4 o'clock, maybe we'll have something about, who knows, diners or motels on Route 66. So every day we'll have a changing program of videos, and Alyssa, who has a background in video, has been amassing this archive for us. More questions?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and let's look at the time too.
Yeah.
We were gonna get.
It's currently 8:15.
Okay, so we have about 15 more
Yeah.
minutes. Yeah.
Do you have a budget to purchase or restore signs? And is there anyone who teaches neon fabrication locally?
Yeah, I don't have a specific budget. I just look at what's in my checkbook and see if it'll accommodate the signs, but I'm not really buying them anymore. We've got more signs than we know what to do with now. We've also got about 30 signs over at Drexel University at 32nd and Market. So the question for us is not so much acquiring signs as where to put the signs. We've had our 30 signs over at Drexel for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now, and they keep renewing the contract year to year. But if they don't renew that, then we're going to have to move those 30 signs, and they will probably end up in the halls here or some other location. But the second part of the question beyond budget was?
Yeah, so is there anyone who teaches neon fabrication locally?
That's a wonderful question. I personally don't know of any schools in Philadelphia, and I don't know of apprenticeships in Philadelphia. There were both. It used to be that the way this occupation was perpetuated was through mom and pop apprenticeships. You know, a sign maker would bring his kids into the business, bring neighborhood people into the business, but the kids ended up going on to college and didn't want to learn the trade very often. Now there seems to be some rebirth in neon, and it's not so much through the sign shops as there are art school programs. You can learn a little bit about neon at places like Tyler has a program. Sam was very involved with Salem Community College, doing scientific glasswork. So there's a community of young people who are interested in learning neon, but unfortunately we don't seem to have the schools that were set up just maybe 15, 20 years ago where you could get a basic introduction to neon. Part of the problem with learning neon is that if you have a school, those schools are generally geared to giving you the basics in like 8 or 10 weeks, but it really takes at least 2 years to become a decent tube bender if you want to learn bending glass. I've never been a glass bender. I did some introductory glass bending, but to get involved with neon means much more than just bending glass. When there used to be large sign shops, they might have 5 or 6 departments. So you'd have people going out and seeing customers, sales department. You'd have a pattern room where they translate the ideas onto paper patterns. Then you'd have the bending itself. Then you have people painting out the tubes, wiring them, doing metal work, doing the installation, working with plexiglass, working with sheet metal. Sam and I do all of those things other than the bending. We sub out the bending. So when people think of being a neon artist or going into the neon business, they typically think of manipulating glass tubes, and that's not all that there is to it. So we'll be doing some demonstrations here, not so much of glass bending because we don't have the fires for doing that, though we do have friends who are glass benders and have made some of the pieces for sale here. But we'll be doing some demonstrations of assembling neon, making patterns of neon, restoring old signs, that kind of thing. There may still be a few schools around the country, but I don't know that of any right here in Philadelphia.
Aiden would like to know, what are your favorite signs that are still in use today? Like, I guess outside of the museum, if you're just driving down the street and you see
Well, I love seeing that Giles and Ransom animated bulldozer. One of my favorite signs, which I've only seen a couple of times, is in St. Louis, which is the A&E Budweiser animated eagle. 6 of those were made in the 1950s, and this is the most fantastic animation I've ever seen. You can see it outside of St. Louis on an expressway there, and the eagle is really gigantic. And whereas most animation sort of works point, there's a certain stiffness to animation. Like if you're looking at the hair replacement center, it jumps from before to after. The animated eagle sign has 6-point animations for the wings of the eagle. So instead of it being 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, it looks like the eagle is actually flapping its wings. So that's probably the most spectacular and favorite sign I think I've ever seen, other than also some signs from that film Glowing in the Dark that were done in Vancouver. There aren't a whole lot of signs left out there that you can discover anymore. The problem is that neon signs have become commodities. It's both a curse and a blessing. So if there is a nice neon sign still left, and if that business is not in operation, somebody's going to grab it up, and they're either going to grab it up, hopefully for a museum, hopefully it'll stay in the community in which it came, but very often it will get grabbed by a picker, and a sign made in San Francisco could end up going to Japan. These are worldwide commodities now. So there's not a lot of the great ones left anymore, unfortunately.
And what's the sign near the Dead Box game with the boy and the man next to the pole talking about simple silence? Yeah,
that's the Lamplighter one. That was from Howard Johnson's. Howard Johnson's was a restaurant franchise. It's funny to say that because I think everybody would know what Howard Johnson's is, but I'm sure there's younger people who don't know a thing about Howard Johnson's. Again, if you looked at our sign cards, it would give you the exact date that Howard Johnson started. Their logo, their main logo, was Simple Simon and the Piemen. And then they had a secondary logo for Howard Johnson's that had banquet rooms, which they called their Lamplighter rooms. And this was the logo for a Howard Johnson's with a lamplighter room. So it's an image of a boy pointing up at the lamp and the traditional old lamplighter, kind of an old New England sensibility to Howard Johnson's architecture and to Howard Johnson's signs. This is one that I traded for, actually. I think I traded half of a Buster Brown sign for half of a Howard Johnson signs. And I don't like to split them up, but sometimes it becomes necessary because these things are gigantic and heavy and hard to deal with. And I really admire the places that have been able to maintain their double-sided signs. We have some big double-sided signs here, but some of them have been split over the years.
And Brian would like to know, do you own any of the animated signs that my dad, Joe Feldman, made in Chinatown?
That he put up in China. I don't know any of Joe's signs that were in Chinatown. But the ones that we have here, the Glenside Hardware, Judy saying? Oh, no, that's not from Chinatown. Yeah, this is this is another one of Joe's signs, and it says Ajax on it up here. If you could focus on the rake and the shovel, that's part of a 65-foot long neon sign that had triple stroke neon letters that said Glenside Hardware. And there were actually two 65-foot long neon signs with 5 hardware graphics on them. So if you go down to our landlord NextFab, they've got the other end of the sign where we've restored some of the other hardware graphics. And right now, frankly, we're looking to dispose of one of the signs. We've got 2 65-foot long signs. We're never going to restore both of them. We've restored part of one of them. But no, the question was about Chinatown. So I don't know what Joe did in Chinatown. But we have pointed out Joe's signs, the Levis's one, the hair replacement one, the Great Pat Steak sign, and this Glenside Hardware. And there might be 1 or 2 others here too, for that matter.
So Bradley asks a question that's also on my mind.
Okay.
So think of it as a question from both of us, which is, Len, what's up with the trolley car diner sign? What's going on with that?
Yeah, the Trolley Car Diner was a really wonderful neon sign where I got a commission to put a neon sign on top of a diner that was brought to Philly from, I believe, Minnesota, somewhere in Minnesota. I think it was called the Joe Palooka Diner originally. And a fellow named Ken Weinstein brought it in, set it up on Germantown Avenue, attached it to an existing fast food restaurant and created a restaurant called the Trolley Car Diner. And he needed an idea for what he would actually call the restaurant and what the logo would be. And we met and came up with the notion that since Germantown Avenue was where trolleys would run up and down, why don't we call the diner the Trolley Car Diner? So we took, I don't know if you want this history, but we took a picture of an old SEPTA trolley car and converted the photograph into a diner, and then made an animated sign, which is really a great animated sign. I'm not trying to boast about it, but it was something very unusual to be able to do. We might have a postcard of that one there too.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, so the Trolley Car Diner had a stoplight where it would go from red to green, and when it was on green, the wheels of the diner would turn, and when it would go red, the wheels stopped turning, the spark at the top of the diner stopped, and the doors would open, and you would see the driver and you would see a passenger getting off of the diner, getting off of the trolley car. So that diner has since closed. There's now construction over at that site, which I think is going to be housing. And my hope is that they're going to maintain the diner in the front. I don't know if the diner will just be a facade in the front or if it's going to be an actual working diner once again. I don't have an answer for that part of it, but I know it's a great neon sign. Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes left, so let's see what other questions we can get in.
All right. So,
Okay.
let's see.
Excuse me, Len, it's Jeremy. Hi.
Hi, Jeremy.
I'm conscious that we're running a little low on time. Before the end, it doesn't have to be right now, but I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about membership. and about founding membership, what the difference is, and basically why we should all become members.
Well, I don't want to do a sales pitch, but I am happy to tell you a little bit about.
I'd like you to do a
Totally
sales
do
pitch,
that.
Glenn. Yeah, I was hoping to prompt you quietly into a sales pitch.
Yeah, we have a membership structure. You could see our website and it tells you about different membership levels. But before we are open to the public, meaning the doors are totally open to the public, COVID is finished, 30, 40, 50 people can come into the museum. Before that point, we're giving out founding memberships, meaning that if you get a membership now, some of the memberships last for 1 year, some are lifetime memberships. If you get a membership that's good for 1 year, we don't start to count that 1 year until we are actually open to the public. So if we open up in June to the public fully, then your 1 year membership starts in June. So it pays you to become a founding member now, and you get extra benefits because as a founding member, someone mentioned this before, you could come in and get a personal tour of the museum. You get discounts in our shop, and you become part of our community. And this is very much a participatory kind of organization where we're looking for members for ideas, for art shows, for presentations, for activities. So we would love for you to become members and think about founding memberships. And better still, this is karma. Today, we got our cards in for membership at the Neon Museum. Woo! And this is a card for founding member. Can you see that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then this is the front side. So we've got both membership cards and founding member cards. I think we're just about out of time now.
Yep.
So I want to thank everybody for attending and helping us make this virtual grand opening less of a fearful and threatening event than I thought it was going to be. And we welcome you to come to the museum, both virtually over the next few months as we do activities, and then in person, face-to-face, mom and pop, play Dead Box with us, hang out, watch videos.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out tonight.